going to take on a shelf building project. So I've got this spot in my garage where I have this little tiny wired shelf. Doesn't hold a lot, it's pretty disorganized. Down below I've got a shop vac, I've got an air compressor, I've got these sports stuff that I'm hanging up on the wall, all kinds of stuff just sitting around cluttering up space. So I decided I'm going to build some shelves. You might be able to see in my truck back there I've got some wood. And I drew up a little plan. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this, but it's going to be a 5 shelf unit. It's going to take up this whole space between the end of the garage and the window. I'm going to have it on casters at the bottom so I can roll it away and be able to sweep below it. But that's my plan for today, and I was going to show you how I do it, so stick around. Here is a look at the non-wood materials that I'll use for the project and tools. So I've got my miter saw, I've got some deck screws, gloves, safety glasses, impact driver, drill, a long clamp, a few shorter clamps. I've got my screwdriver bit set, and casters. And then I went ahead and set up my canopy out here in the sun. It's getting kind of hot out. So give me a little shade while I do some of the woodworking, at least cutting the wood. And then back there inside the garage, that's where the shelf is going to go, back here on this left side right here. Coming over to the wood, I've got wood for a couple different projects in here. But basically all these 2x4s, I bought 20 2x4s. Those will be used for this project. And then 5 of these OSB sheets are going to be used for the shelves themselves. Here's a closer look at the plan. So it's a pretty basic design. I'm going to have 4 vertical 2x4s. I'll cut them to all the same length. Whichever the shortest length of the 4 is, I'll cut them all to that length. And for each shelf, this is kind of a top view down below. I'll have a 31-inch cross beam on each side. I'll have a 65-inch front face on each side of the shelf. And then I'll cut a piece of OSB to size to fit that shelf. And I'll repeat that 5 times. And then on the bottom, I'll install my 4 casters. Over on the wall, I do have some keep out areas I need to pay attention to. I've got my sprinkler controller. This is a ratio sprinkler controller. It's pretty nice. Lets me control everything via an app, and it's a smart sprinkler controller. And then I have an outlet down here that I need to make sure not to get in the way of. I do have some conduit coming up the wall that contains all of the sprinkler wires, so I need to make sure not to build it so deep that it'll get in the way of my garage door rails. So I need to make sure I designed it shallow enough where I don't run out of space. So I had already measured all of this space and figured out what would fit. So hopefully my measurements are correct, and let's go ahead and get started. So one thing I did in this design is I did make sure to kind of optimize my wood usage. So, each of my 2x4s is an 8-foot long 2x4, which is 96 inches. So my front is 65 inches. My sides are 31 inches. 31 plus 65 is 96. The studs that I bought are right at 96 inches, so each dimension will be a shade under. It'll be a shade under 65, a shade under 31, but as long as they're equal on both sides, no big deal. So, I'll measure it at 31. I'll cut it right down the middle of my mark, and so we may have a 1/16 of an inch on either side short, but that's within the error of at least my building capability. Then I am going to have one going through the middle, one crossbeam going through the middle, just to give it added support on the shelves. My OSB that I bought is 1/2 inch. It's not not super thick, so I do want to have some extra support on these shelves just to make sure they don't sag in the middle. But that's kind of how I went about it. It's something to think about when you're making your design, how to optimize your wood usage so you don't have a whole bunch of scrap. So I've gone ahead and pulled aside 4 good, solid studs that I'm going to use for my upright legs for my shelves. So make sure you select wood that doesn't have a long split on the end or big chunks out of it. I have pretty decent wood here, so I was able to find 4 that are in really good shape, and those will be used for my legs later. Now I'm going to go ahead and start cutting my 31 and 65 inch shelf parts that'll hold up the shelves. So I'll show you how that goes. I went ahead and pulled together 10 nice solid studs that I'll use to hold up my shelves. Those will be my 31 inch and 65 inch pieces. I need 2 2x4s for each shelf times 5 shelves. So 5 times 2 is 10. I've set these aside. I'll probably measure and cut 2 at a time just to save a little bit of time. I'm building garage shelves here. It's not rocket science. It doesn't have to be precise to the 16th inch. So I'm okay if there's a tiny bit of slop in here. As long as the shelves stand up and they hold stuff, I'm happy. Don't need to overthink this one. So now I'm gonna go ahead and get started on my measuring and cutting for those 20 pieces that'll be used for the shelves to hold up the shelves. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make my side panels. So if you look at the design, I'm going to make the whole side walls of the shelves first, or at least the top rung and the bottom rung of each side times 2. So in the background you can kind of see where I've started to lay the boards out. So this will be, either my top or my bottom shelf, and vice versa on the other side. I'll go ahead and screw those in. I'll repeat on the other side, and that'll be kind of the start of the structure. I'll have my 4 posts set up. Once I have that, then I can start to kind of piece together the 2 sides. But first of all, I'm gonna make this side and then repeat for the second side. So now I've got my 2 sides built, and it's time to stand it upright and start building the actual structure that'll keep it upright. So what I did is I stood up the first side here. I clamped it to my canopy so that it would stay upright. I used one of my 65 inch boards to figure out the distance to the next. And I stood my second one upright in that spot. And so now I've got my 2 walls standing upright. I'm going to go ahead and start screwing in the sides of my shelves, which will eventually house my OSB for the shelves themselves. So I wanted to give a couple of tips for when you're assembling the shelf sides. Number 1, make sure you're always square. Vertically, horizontally, you want to make sure your pieces are square in both directions. Otherwise, you're going to get to the end and you're going to find you have a crooked shelf. The other thing to keep in mind is where you're screwing in board to board. So you can see here, I installed these 2 screws so that they would go into the side of this vertical 2x4 rather than into the end of this horizontal 2x4. And the reason is when you screw in to the side of a 2x4 or the face of a 2x4, the strength of that hold is far superior to screwing into the end of another 2x4. When you're going with the grain in the end, you won't have the strongest connection between boards, and it can become wobbly and it can ultimately fail. So make sure you're screwing into the sides, side to side or front to side. Try to avoid screwing into the ends of 2x4s because that just does not create a very strong joint between those boards. Okay, so I've decided the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build this next tier onto the sides, and that'll give it enough strength to be able to stand up. I'll install my casters on it after that, and I'll wheel it into the space where it's going to be installed. How did I decide what size shelves? Well, that was pretty easy. Right there. So I looked at my shop vac, measured it. It's about 27, 28 inches. So I decided, let's go ahead and make that a 30-inch span between the top of my OSB on the bottom shelf and the bottom of my bracket on the next shelf up. So I'm gonna need to account for an extra ½ inch or so. So I'll measure up 30.5 inches, and I'll mark my vertical boards at that spot so that I can start to install my second shelf. When you find your plumb and your square a little bit off, like for instance, I went to install this board here and it was flush. This edge was flush over on this side. There was a little bit of an overhang. This backboard was sticking out further than the front board. You can use something like this pipe clamp that I have here, where I hook it on one side to the vertical post, and on the other side, I hooked it to this post, and it kind of brought in this vertical a little bit so that now those two edges are flush. It'll make your design, your build a little cleaner. I like to use these clamps as well as a second set of hands. You can see I marked the boards at 31 inches and then I put my clamps, I hooked my clamps onto the board right at that spot. Set my 2x4 that was about to screw in right on top of those clamps, and it'll just sit there in place while you drill and screw it in. So just a little tip on how to work by yourself, but still get stuff done without having more than one set of hands. Clamps are also an excellent way to work with twisted or bent wood. I try to bring it back true. So I'll often use them to manipulate wood that I get from the store that's a little twisted. For instance, the bottom of this wood was bowed out a little bit. It was a little twisted that way. So I used the clamp to rotate it back in and pull it back flush to this board so I don't end up with any gaps when I screw the two boards together. So just another use for the clamps. Also, you'll notice on one side of these clamps is a kind of a puffed out yellow part with the DeWalt logo. Same with that side. And then on the other side, you can see it on this top clamp, it's smooth. And this is essentially flush with that. This is flush with that. So it gives a nice smooth surface on this side. So just make sure you're using the correct side if you want to rest boards on top of clamps. So I noticed that my screw heads are smaller than the holes in my casters. So I've got a bin of extra washers from other projects that I've recovered and used. I came out here and found some that should work. I mean, it's a wood screw with a washer, so it's not ideal, but it's gonna work just fine. I'm not too worried about that. And these washers fit well onto there, covering the hole. So that's what we'll go forward with, and make sure our casters get secured tightly. Okay, so you can see I've got it up right now. I've got the casters on. Now I'm going to pull it into the space. I'm going to do the rest of the installation on the spot so that I don't get too large, too hard to move before I get done. Okay, so I've gone ahead and pulled it into the space now, inside the garage in the spot where it'll be installed. And I'm really happy with it. It fits just like I'd hoped. I needed to leave enough clearance for the garage door sensor. I needed that shelf to make sure that it didn't interfere with the plugs, which it didn't. There's enough margin there to allow the conduit. And then over here on the windowsill side, we've got about 1 centimeter to spare. So I'm really happy with how it's coming together. Now I'm going to continue installing the next couple of shelves. I'll need to get a ladder to do the top shelf eventually. But right now I'm not in a huge hurry to do that. I will have some challenges because the garage door, it does not clear the garage door. So installing those the back cross beams are going to be a little difficult. I'll have to figure out how to do that, but not a huge deal. We'll figure that out. I'll just probably wheel it into the middle of the garage and do it from there. But so far so good. We're going to keep it rolling. Time to figure out where to put the last 2 shelves. If I measure top to top, it is 58.5 inches. From top to top. I'll have 2 shelves in between, so I need to divide roughly by 3. I think I'll do 20 inches, and then I'll just leave the last 18.5. Just making sure 20 inches will clear. There, that's actually probably not enough. So I think I'll go 22 inches up for my first shelf. Then we'll kind of go from there. Okay, so we got the basic frame done. Now I'm gonna do the supporting beams that go in the middle of the shelves, just to give each shelf a little extra support. I measured all of them. They're all right at about 59, give or take a little bit. So I'm gonna cut 5 59-inch boards to go in the middle of each shelf. Well, one per shelf. I've gone ahead and marked the middle of each board. So it's 17 inches from each end. So I know where to line up my cross boards. And I also, in the spirit of using clamps, I took the scraps from my 59-inch boards and I used the clamp to clamp it up underneath the sideboards on both sides. And that's gonna be the ledge that I set these boards on while I screw them in. I'll likely just do into the end, even though I know I said it's not ideal. I could do on an angle, but I don't think I need to. I think with being compressed from both ends, I think the boards will hold just fine. So I'm gonna just screw them into the ends. But I'll be able to just set them on this ledge, lined up with the marks that I made in the middle of each board, and I should be able to just drill and screw them in. All right, going back to the plan, this is what our plan was. You know, I had made some assumptions on shelf heights. I made some adjustments on the fly, but here we go. There's the finished frame. I can go ahead and move it into place. You can see that there's enough clearance for my sprinkler controller, enough clearance for the plug. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. Rolls really smoothly, and now it's time to make the shelves. So I've got OSB over in the truck over there. What I'll do is measure the shelves just to confirm. 4 of the shelves are going to be the same, and the top one is going to be a little bigger because I can go all the way to the end of the frame. So it'll be a little longer and the same width front to back. But I'm going to make some measurements just to confirm that my plan is accurate, and I'll cut up some plywood. So I double checked my measurements and they all were accurate. So here's just a plan for a 4-foot by 8-foot sheet of OSB. The length is going to be 62 for 4 of the shelves and 65 for the top shelf. That's because I can set the top piece all the way to the very end. It'll overhang those cross beams by about 1.5 inches on each side, but that's okay. And so I'll cut 4 of them that are 62 by 34, and then I'll cut one that's 65 by 34. And then from there, all I need to do is install them. This is my setup for cutting the OSB. So I've got my utility cart here. I like it because it gives it a full, nice base instead of having a sawhorse, 2 sawhorses where it's kind of sagging in the middle. Since OSB doesn't support itself great on its own. And then I've got one of my sawhorses set up here on the end just for the extension. So I'll lay it on here, I'll measure the dimensions, and then I'll go ahead and cut.
So I've got my drywall square. I find it's pretty easy to use when cutting and measuring OSB. What I'm gonna do is cut the end off first. And the reason is I like to have that full 4 foot wide leftover panel in case I have another shelf that I need to make later. I like to have those wider panels instead of the long skinny ones. I find them more useful. So I'll measure 34 inches because I've got 62 that I want to keep. So I'll measure 34 off the end and I'll cut those 34 off the end first. Things to think about, always wear eye protection when you're using a saw with OSB or any wood for that matter. Particles from OSB tend to fly off in large chunks. They can get in your eyes and cause permanent damage. You don't want to lose those. You only have one set of eyes. Second, gloves are really helpful for handling OSB. You get a lot of splinters in your hands, so make sure to use something on your hands just to keep your hands protected too. But yeah, we've got our shelf here. We'll go plop it in, see if it works, and if it does, we'll go ahead and cut the rest. The first piece is cut and I've laid it in on the shelf and it fits great. This was the bottom shelf, so 62 by 34, and looks like it's gonna work really well. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut the rest of them and start installing them so we can finish this thing up. Now the last step is to screw the shelves into the frame. I'm going to be using 1 5/8" deck screws. You could also use nails or different kind of screw. This is just what I have on hand. All right, folks, there you have it. They are finished. Took me a while, but overall not too difficult of a project, just tedious, a lot of wood cuts. But I think these are gonna be great. Great addition to the garage. Get all of this junk and clutter off the floor. There's another of my projects over there. I've got a rack for all of these food bins for all the animals. We've got goats and horses, a pig and chickens, so we have a lot of food bins. This is a rack that kind of holds those food bins on an angle and lets you scoop food out. But that's about a wrap. I really appreciate you watching. If you made it this far. If you learned something or you enjoyed the video, please do like and subscribe. That'll help me tremendously. And leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think. Thanks again. Bye.